A routine stop at a gas station turned into a nightmare when two officers assaulted a pregnant woman. But what they didn't know was that her father was a powerful state senator, and he was already on his way. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to stay updated with more powerful stories. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Angela adjusted her seat, shifting her weight to find some relief from the ache in her lower back. 7 months into her pregnancy, even the smallest movements felt like a struggle. The summer sun beat down on the asphalt, and the warm air inside the car was starting to feel stifling. She wiped her brow and glanced at the GPS, confirming that she still had a few more hours to drive before reaching her sister's house. Fatigue weighed heavily on her, and the discomfort of the road trip was beginning to gnaw at her patience. She needed a break, a chance to stretch her legs, grab some water, and refuel. Spotting a gas station just off the freeway, Angela decided to pull over. It was a small station, tucked between a few deserted buildings, with only a couple of other cars parked by the pumps. The quietness of the place gave her some relief. Maybe a quick stop would help ease the tension in her body. She pulled her car next to one of the pumps, turned off the engine, and exhaled deeply, resting her hand on her growing belly. The faint kicks of her baby reminded her to take things slowly, not to let the stress of the trip get to her. Just a little longer, she whispered softly, as if reassuring both herself and her unborn child. Angela stepped out of the car, wincing slightly as her swollen feet hit the ground. She swiped her card at the pump, selecting the amount she needed and waiting for the beep that signaled her payment had gone through. The pump clicked to life, and she stood still for a moment, enjoying the breeze that swept across the lot, giving her a brief moment of relief from the heat. Once the gas finished pumping, she printed the receipt, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her bag. She planned to buy a bottle of water inside the convenience store, so she locked her car and made her way toward the entrance. The store's interior was dimly lit, the air-conditioned coolness providing a welcome escape from the heat outside. Angela grabbed a bottle of water and a small snack, made her way to the cashier, and paid quickly. She smiled politely at the attendant behind the counter, but he only gave her a hard, suspicious look in return. Back outside, Angela placed the water on the passenger seat and was about to get back into her car when she noticed the same cashier watching her from the doorway. He stepped out, arms crossed, his expression sharp and accusatory. "Hey," he called out, "you pay for that gas?" Angela blinked, surprised by his tone. "Yes, I did," she said calmly, pulling the receipt from her bag to show him. "Here's the proof." The man scoffed, not even glancing at the paper in her hand. "We get people like you all the time," he muttered under his breath. "Think you can fill up and run. I saw you try to pull something. You think you're smart?" Angela felt a knot of unease form in her stomach. His tone was laced with something more than suspicion, something bitter and ugly. She knew that look, that edge in his voice. It wasn't just about the gas. It was about her. "I didn't try to do anything," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. "I paid for the gas, and I have the receipt right here." The man gave her a dismissive look, then pulled out his phone. "We'll see about that," he said. "I'm calling the cops." Angela's heart skipped a beat. "What? Why? I haven't done anything wrong." The cashier smirked. "We'll let them figure that out." He turned away, muttering something under his breath, and dialed the police. Angela stood frozen for a moment, gripping the receipt in her hand. A mixture of disbelief and fear washed over her. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. She glanced around the deserted gas station lot, feeling a wave of vulnerability sweep over her. She was alone, far from home, and now she was about to be confronted by the police. For what? Her baby kicked inside her as if sensing her distress, and Angela instinctively placed a hand on her belly. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, breathing deeply to keep the panic at bay. She had done nothing wrong. She had the proof right there in her hand. Everything would be fine. At least, that's what she tried to tell herself. Minutes later, the sound of tires crunching over gravel echoed through the lot. 2 police cruisers pulled in, parking side by side. The flashing lights reflected off the windows of Angela's car, casting ominous blue and red patterns over the scene. Angela clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm as 2 white officers stepped out of their vehicles. They exchanged brief glances with the cashier, who nodded toward Angela's car with a smug expression. One of the officers, a tall man with a thick build, adjusted his belt as he approached. "You the one trying to skip out on paying for gas?" he asked gruffly, his eyes narrowing as he looked Angela up and down. "No, I paid," Angela answered, holding out the receipt. "I have proof right here." The officer didn't even glance at the receipt. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered curtly. Angela's heart raced. "I'm not in the vehicle," she said, gesturing toward her open car door. "I just—" "Step away from the car," the officer snapped, cutting her off. "Now!" Angela's pulse quickened. She could feel the shift in the air, the hostility radiating from both officers. They weren't interested in explanations. They had already made up their minds about her. "I'm pregnant," Angela said softly, placing a protective hand on her belly. "Please, I've done nothing wrong. I just want to leave." The second officer, younger but just as stern, stepped closer, his hand resting casually on the handle of his taser. "We gave you an order," he said flatly. "Step away from the car." Angela tried to steady her breathing, feeling the knot of fear tighten in her chest. "I don't understand," she pleaded. "Why are you treating me like this? I paid for the gas. I have the receipt right here." The first officer's expression hardened. "You're acting suspicious," he said coldly. "You better cooperate, or this is going to get a lot worse for you." Angela swallowed hard, her hand still resting protectively over her belly. The officers were not listening. They didn't care about the truth. They only saw what they wanted to see. A black woman they could control. "Please," Angela whispered. "I just want to go home." But the officers exchanged knowing glances, their stances growing more rigid. It was clear that they weren't going to let her leave without incident. The younger officer took a step forward. "We'll ask you one last time," he warned. "Step away from the car." Angela's heart pounded painfully in her chest. Her baby kicked again, as if urging her to protect them both. She knew that no matter how much she tried to stay calm, things were about to spiral out of control. Her mind raced through the worst possibilities, but she had no time to react. The officers were closing in on her, their postures tense, ready for confrontation. The nightmare was just beginning. Angela's heart raced as the officers stepped closer, their eyes cold and unrelenting. She instinctively pressed a hand to her belly as if shielding her unborn child from the growing threat. The air around her felt heavy, suffocating, as if every second dragged her deeper into a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She had heard stories like this before, encounters that began with routine stops but escalated into something far worse. Now she was living it. "Step away from the car," the older officer barked again, his voice sharp and impatient. "I told you," Angela said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I paid for the gas. I have the receipt right here." She held up the crumpled paper, her hand trembling, but the officers showed no interest. The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then grabbed Angela's arm roughly. The sudden force made her stumble, and pain shot through her abdomen as she fought to stay upright. "Don't touch me," she cried out, panic lacing her voice. "I'm pregnant. Please, just let me go." But the officers were unmoved. The older one sneered, "We told you to cooperate." Before Angela could react, the younger officer yanked her harder, pulling her away from the car. She lost her balance, falling onto the asphalt with a painful thud. Sharp pain radiated from her stomach, and she gasped, clutching her belly. The officers were on her in an instant. The older one forced her face down onto the hot pavement, driving his knee into her back. "Stop resisting," he barked, as if her writhing in pain was an act of defiance. "I'm not resisting," Angela screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You're hurting me." The crowd that had gathered near the gas station began to murmur, their voices rising in confusion and disbelief. Some pulled out their phones to record the unfolding horror. "She's pregnant," someone shouted from the group. "What's wrong with you?" But the officers didn't stop. The younger one pulled out his baton and struck Angela across her legs, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through her body. "This is what happens when you don't listen," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Angela cried out, her voice cracking under the weight of fear and agony. Every breath she took was a battle, every movement filled with dread for her unborn baby. She could feel her pulse hammering in her chest, her mind racing through the worst possibilities. What if something happened to the baby? The officer's knee pressed harder into her back, pinning her to the ground. "I told you," he growled. "Stop resisting." "I'm not," Angela sobbed, her cheek scraping against the rough pavement. "Please, I just want to protect my baby." The older officer leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You people are all the same," he muttered. "Think you can do whatever you want." Angela felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat, the words hitting her harder than the baton ever could. This isn't just about gas, she realized. This is about power, about control, and they've already decided I don't deserve any mercy. Her vision blurred with tears as she struggled to gather her thoughts. The pain in her belly sharpened, and she knew she couldn't stay on the ground much longer. Something was wrong. The baby. "Please, not now." "Get off of her," someone in the crowd shouted. More voices joined in, calling for the officers to stop, but no one dared to physically intervene. Angela's mind was a haze of pain and panic, but through it all, one thought surfaced. "I need help. I need to call Dad." With a surge of desperation, she stretched her arm toward her bag where her phone had fallen. Every movement felt like agony, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the edge of the phone. "Hey," the younger officer snapped, "what do you think you're doing?" Angela ignored him, her entire focus on the phone. She managed to grasp it and swipe the screen open with shaky hands. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrolled through her contacts, her mind clouded by fear. "Please, please pick up." The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Come on, Dad, answer." On the 4th ring, a familiar voice came through the line. "Angela, what's wrong?" Angela's breath hitched as relief flooded through her. "Dad," she gasped, her voice choked with tears. "I'm at a gas station. The police. They're hurting me. I don't know what to do." There was a beat of silence on the other end, and Angela knew what was coming. Her father, Senator Wilson, was a man who rarely showed emotion, but in that pause she could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface. "Where are you?" His voice was low, controlled, but deadly serious. "Tell me exactly where you are." Angela struggled to speak through the pain. Exit 22, off the freeway." "I'm on my way," her father said, his tone sharp and focused. "Stay on the phone with me. Help is coming. Just hold on, baby. Hold on." Angela nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. "Dad, they're not stopping," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm scared. Please, hurry." "I'm coming," Senator Wilson promised, his voice filled with quiet fury. "I'm coming, and they won't touch you again. Just stay with me, Angela. I'm almost there." The officers noticed the phone in her hand, and the younger one reached down, snatching it from her grasp. "Who the hell are you calling?" he demanded, his face twisted with suspicion. Angela didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her father was already on his way, and she knew this nightmare was far from over, but help was coming. The air at the gas station felt thick with tension, the crowd pressing closer, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. The police officers stood over Angela, unmoved by the protests. Her body ached, and her heart pounded as she lay on the ground, struggling to breathe. Every throb of pain in her abdomen sent waves of fear through her. Something was wrong, but she had to hold on, for the baby, for herself. Suddenly, the distant roar of an engine pierced the humid air. A sleek black SUV sped into the gas station lot, tires screeching as it came to a halt. The crowd fell silent, parting instinctively as the driver's door swung open. From the vehicle emerged a tall, imposing man in a dark, tailored suit. His face was set in stone, his eyes blazing with fury barely held in check. It was Senator Wilson, Angela's father. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The officers glanced at each other, confusion flickering across their faces. They didn't recognize him immediately, but they could sense the shift in power. Something was about to change. The older officer straightened, still keeping one hand near his holster. He tried to maintain control of the situation, barking, "Step back, sir. This is police business." Senator Wilson's expression didn't waver. His gaze swept the scene, taking in the sight of his daughter sprawled on the pavement, her face streaked with tears, one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. The sight was enough to make his blood boil. He clenched his fists at his sides, willing himself to stay calm for now. "Get your hands off my daughter," Wilson said, his voice low but carrying a dangerous edge. The older officer's brows furrowed in confusion. "Your daughter?" he repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. "Sir, we're handling a suspect here. Step back before you interfere." Wilson's jaw tightened. "Suspect?" he said slowly, his voice now laced with venom. "That's my pregnant daughter you have pinned to the ground. You've assaulted her, and you're going to answer for it." The younger officer's face went pale as realization began to dawn. He whispered to his partner, "I think that's Senator Wilson." The older officer's smug confidence faltered for the first time. His grip on his belt tightened, but it was clear he was starting to understand the gravity of his mistake. The man standing before him wasn't just another angry civilian, he was one of the most powerful men in the state. "Senator, sir," the older officer began, but Wilson raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't speak," Wilson said, his voice cold as steel. "Get away from my daughter, now." The officers hesitated for a split second too long. That was all Wilson needed to see. His glare hardened, and he took a step closer. "If you so much as touch her again, I will personally make sure you never wear that badge again." The officers backed away slowly, uncertainty etched on their faces. They were used to being the ones in control, But now the balance of power had shifted completely. The crowd, sensing the change, began to murmur louder, their phones still pointed at the scene, recording every moment. Angela, still lying on the ground, blinked through her tears. Relief flooded through her at the sight of her father, though the pain in her body remained sharp and unforgiving. A paramedic team arrived moments later, summoned by Wilson's personal request, and rushed to her side. "Ma'am, we've got you," one of the paramedics said gently, helping Angela sit up. "We're going to make sure you and the baby are okay." Angela nodded weakly, clutching her belly. She could still feel the dull ache, but the fear that had consumed her was starting to lift. Her father's presence was like a shield between her and the officers who had hurt her. Wilson crouched beside her, his expression softening for the first time. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I'm here now." Angela leaned into him, her body trembling with exhaustion. "They wouldn't stop," she whispered. "They didn't care, Dad. They kept hurting me." Wilson's jaw clenched again, and he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. "I know," he said, "but they're done. They'll never touch you again." The paramedics carefully lifted Angela onto a stretcher, preparing to transport her to the hospital for a full checkup. Wilson stood up, his expression hardening as he turned back to the officers. "You?" he said, pointing at the older officer. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, his confidence shattered. "Officer Daniels," he muttered, shifting uncomfortably under Wilson's gaze. "Officer Daniels," Wilson repeated slowly, as if committing the name to memory. "You are under arrest for assaulting my daughter and abusing your authority. You, too," he added, gesturing to the younger officer, who looked as though he might faint on the spot. "Both of you." The officers stood frozen, disbelief and panic spreading across their faces. "Sir, please," Daniels stammered. "We didn't know—" Wilson's eyes burned with fury. "You didn't need to know who she was," he snapped. "You needed to treat her with basic human decency, and you failed. Now you'll face the consequences." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices rising in triumph. The cameras caught every word, every expression, every ounce of Wilson's righteous anger. The officers had no choice but to comply as two backup officers arrived to cuff them. Daniels and his partner were led away, their faces pale and drained of all arrogance. Their careers, their reputations, everything was slipping through their fingers. As the police cars pulled away, Wilson returned to Angela's side. The paramedics were ready to transport her to the hospital, but she reached for her father's hand, gripping it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Wilson leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "You never have to thank me for this," he said. "I'll always fight for you." Angela managed a weak smile, though the weight of the day still hung heavily over her. The pain, the fear, the humiliation, none of it would disappear easily. But for now, she knew she was safe. Her father had made sure of that. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens wailed to life, Wilson stood tall, watching the scene unfold one last time. The crowd began to disperse, but the impact of what had happened would not fade so quickly. The videos were already being shared online, the outrage spreading like wildfire. Wilson's expression hardened once more. This isn't over, he thought. Not by a long shot. He knew what needed to be done. The officers would be held accountable, not just for Angela, but for every person they had mistreated. Wilson would make sure of it, The system that allowed this to happen would be confronted head-on, and change would come. It had to. He glanced one last time at the departing ambulance, his heart heavy with both anger and resolve. For Angela, for the baby, and for everyone else, this fight was only beginning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new stories that are sure to hook you. Click on the bell to be notified about new videos. Did you like this video? Then watch the next ones. They are already waiting for you. And write in the comments where you're watching us from. We're interested to know your story.